Hi Lee, hi Rochelle.
Hi, everybody.
How's it going?
Good, good. How are you guys doing?
Oh, it's good.
Good. We'll give it probably a minute or two more and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Sounds good.
Hi Heather.
Hey Chris, I'm at work, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay, sounds good. I hope you've been doing well.
I have, thank you. And yourself?
Doing well, yes. Yeah, I'm just waiting for this cool weather to come in here.
Oh, I heard that. 7 days of rain. I'm psyched.
I'll take it if it happens, but I'm also trying not to get my hopes up.
Yes, I hear that.
All right, guys. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for hopping on Be the Market Expert. Let me shut my door because I know I can be too loud for the other agents in the office. All right, so we're going to dive into the standard article or the typical article we always dive into first with our friend Logan Motoshami. And this is just his weekly market update that he does. Now, this is on a national level, so what he talks about here may not be exactly what we're seeing in our local market. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to skip past mortgage spreads and 10-year treasury because I don't know much about that. That's all in the lender world, and stay in our own lane here. So we're going to hop right into weekly pending sales. So what we did see with weekly pending sales is this week we were at 67,026 versus last week we were at 66,347. So it is still slightly positive year over year, and the demand is slowing, but we're not seeing a major drop here. Now, the important distinction I would say that we need to make is that slower does not equal a dead market. Now, if we jump down to total pending sales here, what we're seeing is 381,000 this week versus 374,000 last week. So we are still ahead of last year. But as we look here, that gap is getting slightly smaller as what we had earlier. Now, the higher rates are definitely cooling that activity, I think. Now, then when we get to the mortgage purchase application data, this is where we're seeing more weakness. Applications typically they give us a good 30 to 90 days out. The buyers here are 30 to 90 days out of closing. And then so far in 2026, what we've seen is 25 overall, we've seen 25 positive year over year weeks. And we've also seen only four negative year over year weeks. Recently, though, is when we've started to see those more negative year over year. So we are seeing kind of a dip there. Now, I think that he talks about the mortgage rates being at 6.64 as a threshold. Once they get higher, that's typically when we see the demand start to slow. But the rates staying below 7% have helped that major drop off that we could potentially see down the road if it goes there. So that's kind of what we're seeing with the mortgage purchase. Now, as we dive into the housing inventory, there was 865,709, uh, and it fell from 872,932, and that was the week before. So last year, we were at 859,000 as opposed to the 865,000 as well that we saw this year. So inventory is only about 0.8%. It's 0.78% higher year over year. And that's really not a huge increase. The demand is holding up, which is nice, and that's kept the inventory from piling up, but we are seeing it definitely slow down there. Now, as we jump into the new listings, what we're seeing here is this year we're at 67,301 versus last year's 66,341. So we are officially in the normal season decline. Now, 2026 has still been healthier for new listings in recent years, but we've crossed 80,000 listings 4 times this year. We're definitely getting closer to normal. It's just kind of the lower end of normal. Now, when we jump into price cuts next, now keep in mind that all homes, or typically the national average is about 33% of homes or 1/3 of homes do have some sort of price cut while they're on the market. So what we're seeing here is the average right now is 41.44%, as opposed to last year at 42%. So it's almost identical now. And then earlier this year, the price cuts were noticeably lower than 2025. So the higher rates are starting to close that gap, and then the national home prices are still showing roughly about a 1 to 2% growth. So what are we taking from this article here? Well, the market is cooling, it's not collapsing. The higher rates are absolutely affecting buyers right now. And the demand has been surprisingly resilient, which Logan notes multiple times every time he writes this article. So, what we're not seeing is a massive inventory buildup. We're not seeing a huge drop in pending sales. We're not seeing a flood of new listings, and we're not seeing dramatically higher price cuts. With rates where they are, I would expect demand to look a lot worse than it actually does. And that's what the real story is here. People still have reasons to move, what we call the 4 Ds: death, divorce, downsizing, and diapers. Things happen in people's lives. And so there's always some sort of factor that's going to come up. Life doesn't stop just because mortgage rates are at 6% plus. So that's what we have to keep in mind. Now, we don't want to lead when we're talking to our buyers about this. We don't want to lead with, like, the rates are high right now. They already know that. Instead, what we want to talk about is that the demand has cooled, which means there's less competition. The price cuts are around 41%, which means that the sellers are adjusting, and there's more opportunities to negotiate on the price, to negotiate concessions, or even rate buy downs, or even repairs. So the rate isn't the only number that we can negotiate around. Now, when it's talking to sellers, the conversation's a little different, but still ultimately the same idea. This data gives us a really good expectation setting conversation. The buyers are still buying, but they are more payment sensitive. So pricing correctly from day one matters. Almost 4 in every 10 listings are seeing a price adjustment, and those are the ones that are not pricing accordingly. So the goal isn't to scare sellers into lowering the price. It's priced for today's buyer, not yesterday's market. Now, higher rates are creating friction, but they haven't eliminated demand. So instead of talking about how the market is bad, help them understand that the strategy has changed. The buyers have more negotiating opportunities, and the sellers have to be more intentional with their pricing. And agents who understand how to navigate both sides of that have a really, really good opportunity right now. All right, we are going to jump into Article 2. Now, this one is Keller Williams names 5 leaders to growth roles. So this one is obviously a little different from our normal market data. I wouldn't spend a ton of time explaining who got what title. The bigger conversation is what KW is signaling about where the company is headed. So we did recently, us being part of Keller Williams, we did recently appoint 5 senior leaders into new growth-focused positions. Now, the big areas that we invested the leadership into is our franchise growth and profitability, our KW commercial side of things, the agent attraction, the digital and social strategy, and the operational execution. So who did we hire? Well, we hired John Clyde, who is the head of divisions. He's overseeing alignment across 30 plus US and Canadian regions, and his focus is growth, productivity, profitability, and operations. Then we hired Sean Hostert. He is head of commercial operations and strategy. So his focus is obviously going to be growing that commercial side of the Keller Williams world. He does bring 15 plus years of commercial and investment experience as well. Then we have Andy and Leslie Peters. They are co-heads of the U.S. Growth and Attraction. Their focus is agent attraction nationally, and they currently lead slash coach slash train. It's like over 2,200 KW agents as of right now. So they built a nationally successful real estate team all by themselves. And then we have Gabby Maddox Davis. Now she's the head of digital, the social for growth and attraction. This one did catch my attention. Now, her focus is using digital and social media to drive agent growth. She grew her own market center to nearly 500 agents in 3 years, and her market center was Keller Williams' fastest net growing worldwide in 2024 and 2025. So, again, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but what we can take away from this is the personnel changes, and it's where KW is putting its resources. The growth is clearly the priority, and they're approaching growth from several directions. They want the better performing market centers. They want more productive agents. That's us. They want agent attraction, commercial opportunities, and they want to be on digital and social media. The digital piece is huge. I think we spend a lot of time talking about social media as a way to attract our clients. But our online presence also tells other agents who we are, what we're doing, whether our business is growing or whether we're someone that they want to be around. Our digital presence is definitely becoming part of our reputation. Now, what does that mean for you? This isn't really an article that you're going to take back to your buyers or sellers, but this one is about your business. And I think a few questions worth asking yourself around this article. Are you taking advantage of what's around you? Keller Williams is investing heavily in growth, but ultimately Keller Williams growing doesn't automatically mean your business grows. You still have to plug in. You still have to take the classes. You still have to use the technology that we learn about. You have to build the relationships with your sphere. You have to learn the Keller Williams systems and models and attend masterminds and collaborate with other agents. That's where the learning is going to happen. That's where building your business and growing it is going to happen. So don't ignore your digital presence. If someone Googled you today, what would they see? Would they know that you're actively selling real estate? Because that is becoming increasingly important, not because everyone needs to become an influencer, but because consumers right now and other agents are actually checking and verifying authenticity online before they even ever call us. So that's where this comes into play here. So let's move on to the third article. Now, this is Remax and Keller Williams win final approval of Baton One settlement. This is something we haven't talked about in probably a month or two, but this one can get very legal very quickly. So I'm going to try to keep the conversation somewhat of a lower mixed high level. The important piece for us is the particular chapter for Keller Williams is essentially closed. So what happened is a federal judge gave final approval to the settlements for Keller Williams and Remax. And this is all around the NAR settlement that was going on a couple years ago, or what is called in here the Baton One home buyer commission lawsuit. So with approval, the case is now dismissed against Keller Williams and Remax. The Keller Williams settlement was 20 million. The Remax settlement was like 8.5 million. There are no class members objected or opted out. And most importantly for us, there's no new business practice changes that were included in our settlement. So the quick background, this dates back to 2021, similar to the seller commission lawsuits that we've discussed in the past. But this lawsuit came from the buyer side. Basic, the basic allegation with this one is that NAR policies inflated agent commissions, and those commissions ultimately contributed to higher prices paid for or paid by the buyers. There are still other defendants and related lawsuits working through the courts. So this does not mean that all commission litigation in real estate is over, but it does mean that our involvement as part of KW in this particular case has been resolved. And I wouldn't spend much meeting time on the 20 million. What matters to us is there's no additional practice changes coming out of this settlement. We've already spent the last couple of years adjusting to a different way of discussing compensation, even though things really didn't change a whole lot for us because it was always negotiable. We've already been doing that. And if anything, all this litigation has reinforced is that something we should have been doing anyway, which is clearly explaining our value and our compensation up front. And that's not going away. And that's not a bad thing. We want to have these conversations before. So, again, not a huge thing. I think if there's a point I'd land on with this article, I just see this as a reminder of where our industry is headed. There's more transparency, there's more conversations, and more responsibility on us to communicate our value. And that's not something that great agents should be afraid of. It's something, that we can easily take on. And if you can clearly explain what you do, why it matters, and how you get paid, you're already ahead of the game. So, all right, moving on now to this next one. Remax post Q2 net loss of 4.3 million amid real acquisition. So this one is a little bit less about Remax having a rough quarter and more about the bigger shift that's happening across the real estate companies right now. So Remax's Q2 numbers, their revenue was 68.5 million, but they were down 5.8% year over year. Their net loss was 4.3 million. Their worldwide agent count did actually grow to by 1.5%, but the US and Canada agent count fell by 2.2%. So the US agent US Canada agent count is somewhere around 72,000 people. 72,968 is what it says right there. Meanwhile, Real, their Q2 revenue was 700.6 million, that which is up 30% year over year, but they also reported a net loss of about 8 million. However, $11.6 million of expenses were tied to the Remax acquisition. So the acquisition is that Real is still moving forward with acquiring Remax. They are expected to close in the second half of 2026. The shareholder votes are happening August 14th, so just in a few days. And the Department of Justice already ended its antitrust waiting period early. So the numbers are interesting, but I think the industry story is bigger. And what I'm taking from this article specifically, we've talked about consolidation quite a bit lately. And here it is again. We're seeing it right here in this article. Brokerages are looking for scale. That's why Keller Williams just purchased JMG, and we're constantly seeing this in our industry. But there's clearly a larger trend happening, and I think what it is real estate companies are competing. They're competing for agents, they're competing for technology and leads and market share. They're competing for profitability in their consumer relationships. And transaction volume still isn't anywhere near the crazy pandemic years. So companies are asking themselves, how do we grow when the market itself isn't doing the growing for us? And that's what I find interesting about this article. Something else I'd like to point out. We don't hear Remax lost 4.3 million and immediately translate that into Remax is failing. That's just too simple. Real also reported an $8 million loss while they simultaneously grew their revenue 30%. These are acquisition costs. These are investments and other expenses that are happening behind these numbers. So one number rarely tells the whole story. And that's actually a pretty good parallel to how we should be looking at our housing data too. This isn't necessarily a buyer or seller conversation either. Again, I'm kind of turning this one back on us. But the big companies are asking, how do we grow in a slower market? You should be asking yourself the exact same question. Because you can't sit around waiting for the rates to fall or for more buyers to appear or just sellers to magically call and say they want to list or even for the market to get easier. Where can you as an agent create growth? Maybe it's your database, maybe it's open houses or social media, geographical farming, agent referrals, past clients, AI and technology, whatever it might be, some sort of niche that you haven't pursued. So, where I'd land on this with this article, the real estate industry is consolidating and evolving because companies know they can't rely on the market to create growth for them, and neither can we. The agents who grow through this market are probably going to come out significantly stronger when the transaction volume eventually picks back up. So instead of asking this, when is the market going to get better? Start asking yourself, what can I get better at while the market is like this? And that's something that is completely within our control and that we can take advantage of. All right. Moving on. Now we're going to jump over to Inman for a couple articles. So this is $300 million San Antonio team, Marty Realty Group, joins Keller Williams. So this is another addition to our wonderful team of Keller Williams. So quick rundown of this article. Marty Realty Group is joining the Keller Williams City View in San Antonio. It's led by Chris and Meredith Marty. The team has built a roughly $300 million business. They've also created businesses around new construction, lead generation, buy before you sell, and cash offer solutions. Their goal isn't just to join KW, they want to use Keller Williams systems to scale and to expand on a national level. And this does come right after, like I just mentioned, that we acquired the 1,200 agent Jason Mitchell Group, who did nearly $5.9 billion in 2025 volume. And we just also talked about Keller Williams putting 5 new leaders into growth focused positions. So there is a pretty obvious theme that I'm starting to see here. Keller Williams isn't quiet about growth right now. We're watching other companies consolidate through mergers and acquisitions, but at the same time, Keller Williams is saying we want productive businesses here. And I think the Marty story is interesting because they weren't some struggling team looking for someone to save them. They had already built it. They already built a successful real estate team with technology, with multiple businesses and lead generation systems. They joined because they wanted to go bigger, and that's a really important distinction. Their message was essentially, we've built something successful independently, but now we need to scale it more and take it nationally. And when they looked around and figured out how they could do that, they saw Keller Williams as the platform to do it. And I think this also perfectly connects to Article 2 that we talked about. Keller Williams appointed the new leadership specifically around growth, attraction, commercial, digital and social, and then franchise productivity. And now we're seeing what this strategy looks like in real life. It's not just corporate restructuring, they're actually recruiting productive businesses. The article even says that Keller Williams has been on a recruitment tear. And that's a pretty strong statement to be putting out on Inman. So, how can we use this? I mean, I'd use this as a conversation about your own business because I really like something that Meredith Marty said in this article. Their next stage of growth requires them to think bigger and succeed through others. That's straight out of the models that we always talk about here at Keller Williams. So ask yourself, am I building a business or am I just doing transactions? What part of my business depends completely on me? Where could I use my systems better? What could I leverage? Who could I succeed through? What would my business look like if I actually thought bigger? And now there's been a lot of noise around Keller Williams over the last few years. There's been the lawsuits, there's been some leadership changes, some competition, agent leavings, new brokerage models. But look at what we're talking about this week. Keller Williams is putting new leaders in charge of growth. Keller Williams just received final approval on a major settlement. And now productive teams and massive businesses are choosing to come over to Keller Williams. And that's something that's worth paying attention to, especially because these aren't just businesses saying, oh, Keller Williams is going to build our business for us. They're saying, we've already done it. We've already built our business to be successful. And we believe Keller Williams can take us another step further. And that's a very different story and one that I think our agents should feel pretty darn good about. So, moving on to the last Inman article. Now, these five major housing markets have the most motivated sellers. And the reason I wanted to bring this one up is because Denver is specifically mentioned in this. So this one is especially relevant to us because Denver ranked number 5 in the country for seller motivation among major markets. So Parsi Labs isn't predicting what sellers might do. They're tracking what sellers are actually doing with their listings. Their index will look at how long homes are sitting, how quickly sellers are making price reductions, how often they're reducing, and how large those reductions are. Denver numbers are as follows. So we have 50.9% of listings that have had a price cut percentage. So that is a slightly higher than what we saw in the national average. The median reduction is about 4.4%. 14.6% are listed lower than what the seller previously paid. The prices are 6.7% lower than a year ago. The prices are 14.1% below the June 2022 peak. So that 14.6 number really jumped out at me. Denver actually had the highest percentage of listings below the seller's previous purchase price of these 5 markets that were in the top 5. And this is another reminder that real estate right now is incredibly hyper local. Austin, is going to look very different than New York. Denver looks very different from Chicago. We can't take a national headline and assume it describes what's happening here. Now, my takeaway from this article is I don't look at this as bad news for Denver. I look at it as a market that's requiring sellers to get more realistic. We're not in a market where you can pick a price because your neighbor sold it for that 3 years ago, or you can't just add on another $20,000 just to see what happens. You can't ignore the condition as a seller, and you can't sit for 60 days and assume that the right buyer is eventually going to appear. The buyers do have choices now, and when half of the listings are reducing their prices, that tells me that sellers are having to compete for those buyers. So it's kind of taken a flip there. But here's the other side of this. A price reduction doesn't necessarily mean the market is crashing. It also can mean that the property was priced incorrectly to begin with. And that's where I think agents need to be careful with this headline. Don't walk into a listing appointment and say, Denver is one of the worst markets in the country. Please don't do that. Instead, the conversation becomes, we have had more competition, so getting your pricing and your positioning right from day one matters more than it ever has in the years past. Take this back to your sellers. This gives you a really good listing appointment conversation. You can say things like the buyers have more choices, or that the more than half of Denver listings are making price adjustments. That means that we need to pay attention to what buyers are actually responding to, not just what other sellers are asking. Our goal shouldn't be to test the market. Our goal should be to position your home as one of the best options in your price range from the beginning. And there's actually a positive message here for sellers. The homes are still selling. The strategy has just changed. Instead of how high can we list it, the better question is where do we position it so that buyers choose us over the competition? And that's where your expertise matters. So take this back to your buyers. This article might even be an even better conversation to have with your buyers because the buyers who've been sitting on the sidelines, they may not realize how much negotiating power has actually returned. So you can now tell them that Denver sellers are showing more motivation, price reductions are common, and you may have opportunities to negotiate the price or the closing cost or inspection items, seller concessions to help with the rate buy down, all of those different things. And I would also remind buyers that a 4% price reduction isn't the only opportunity. Sometimes getting the seller to contribute toward a rate buy down or the closing costs could have a much bigger impact on a buyer's immediate affordability. So don't just hunt for the biggest price cut. There's other different factors that you can tie into that will still help your buyer and also seem appealing to the seller. Hunt for the seller who's ready to make the deal. Now, turning this into a positive spin, obviously, this is the kind of market where good agents become more valuable, not less. When everything's sold immediately and consumers didn't have, always understand what we did. But now sellers need help. Sellers need help with pricing and positioning and marketing and adjustments and even negotiation. And that's our lane. And buyers need help identifying opportunity and leverage, concessions, and financial strategy, which is again our lane. So a more complicated market actually creates more opportunities for agents who know how to explain it. So we'll move on from this one. And I got one more article here, and then we'll dive into our local RE Colorado. So, what this is real estate agents' creative marketing tactics for buyer demand. So, this article is basically saying that the traditional open house isn't necessarily enough anymore. With buyers dealing with higher rates, uncertainty, and summer distractions, agents are finding creative ways to get attraction. And some of these ideas are actually pretty cool. So, a few of these that stood out to me is as we scroll down here. Um, there's the 1 hour power hour. So the 1 hour power hour is, open houses, it condenses traffic into a shorter window and it makes the home feel busier and it also creates that urgency and energy. Now there's also neighborhood themed giveaways. One agent created a basket entirely from local business. It marketed the lifestyle in the neighborhood, not just the house. And then the bonus of that was tagging those businesses creates additional social media exposure. Now, another option that you can do is turning a property's quirks into content. So, like if you have an 80s style home because the set, and it became the set for a comedian's viral videos. Instead of trying to hide the house that was dated, they leaned all the way into the 80s vibe. There's also the hyper local content. So one agent built an Instagram around local history and grew it to 85,000 followers. Another created a custom children's coloring book featuring local landmarks. So there's a lot of different options you can do. Now you can also do marketing outside of real estate. You can do golf course pop-ups, free coffee for contact information, community events. One team did say that they were even generating 60 plus qualified leads per event. And one of my favorites is the day in the life showings. Maybe that's a sunrise coffee. Maybe it's a lunch at the property or evening showings to experience the view, gift cards to nearby restaurants after a showing, whatever it might be. There's all these different, things that you can do to go find business out there and to turn it into your next client. So my biggest takeaway isn't everyone needs to go make a coloring book with this. It's what we need to stop asking. What do agents normally do to market a listing? And start asking yourself something along the lines of what makes this home interesting? Because every listing doesn't need the same marketing plan. If it's a golf course property, tie it around something involving golfers. If it's a walkable neighborhood, partner with the businesses that people can walk to. Is it amazing views, amazing sunset views? Well, don't hold an open house at 11 a.m. then. You probably want to do it sometime around the sunset. Um, is it an older home with, some funky personality to it? Don't hide it. Have fun with it. This creativity should come from the property. And one of my best social media posts that I ever did was around a creative event that happened with one of my open houses when I got my open house balloon stuck in a tree. So, like, again, like people want to see that authenticity from you. Now, as we talk about everything here, and what we can kind of take away from this article is this is where I think today's market can actually be fun. When listings sold in 48 hours, you didn't have the chance to be creative. Today, you get to market again. You get to experiment. You get to create content and build those local partnerships with businesses and local vendors and things. You get to show sellers why having a real marketing professional matters. And I really liked one of the final points from the article, which is the goal isn't to convince somebody to buy the house, it's to give them enough information and confidence that the right decision becomes obvious. And that's what marketing is. It's not louder, it's not gimmickier, it's not whatever it might be, it's just more intentional. So, we're going to dive into local stats real quick, and then we'll finish it off here. So, local stats here at RE Colorado. Last week's new listings, we were at 1,383. We are now at 1,393. So, we saw 10 new listings, or an increase of 10 listings over the last week. Coming soon, we went from 184 last week to 183. Back on the market, we went from 290 down to 242. Price decrease, we did see not much of a change. I think it was a 5 home increase. So we went from 2329 up to 2334. Pending, we went down from 1,173 to 1,092. And closed, we did go down from 1,153 to 905. So if I can leave you with some final thoughts from today, I think, or, if there's one word to sum up everything we talked about today, too, I think that that would be opportunity. Because, yes, there are challenges. We're still seeing mortgage rates are high. The buyer demand is starting to slow. The Denver sellers are making more price reductions. The industry is still dealing with, obviously, lawsuits and consolidation, like we talked about. And consumers have more information and more tools than ever before, but people are still buying. Pending sales are still slightly higher than last year. Total pending sales are still ahead. The inventory is healthier, and the homes are still moving. The market isn't dead, it's just less forgiving. So sellers can't throw a house on the market and expect it to sell, and buyers can't assume every seller will give the house away. And agents, us, we can't rely on what worked 3 or 4 years ago. We have to be better. For our sellers, we need to set expectations earlier. Pricing matters, condition matters, presentation matters. And after that last article, even creativity matters. So if half the listing in Denver are reducing their prices, our first question should be, how much should we reduce? What can we do differently to make buyers notice this house? Ask yourselves the weird questions that you wouldn't necessarily always ask yourselves. Now, for our buyers, this is probably the most leverage that they've had in years. So instead of telling buyers, rates suck, maybe wait, our job is to help them look at the entire opportunity. Can we negotiate the price? Can we get concessions to help buy down their rate? Is there a property that's been sitting? Is there a motivated seller? Can we structure something that makes the payment work? Because a headline might say 6+% mortgage rates, but the individual opportunity might tell a completely different story. So for us as agents, I truly think that that's where really the theme of this week's article. Keller Williams is investing in growth. Successful teams are choosing to come to Keller Williams because they want to grow. The industry is changing. The consumers have more information. The sellers have more competition, and the buyers have more leverage. So what are we doing with it? Because this probably isn't the easiest market we're ever going to work in, but easy markets don't necessarily create great agents. Markets like this do. They force us to understand the numbers. They force us to communicate better. They force us to get creative, and they force us to actually demonstrate our value. So don't spend this week trying to convince people that the market is amazing. Help them understand the market they're actually in, and then show them how to win in it. And that is where the opportunity lies. That's all I got for all of you today. I appreciate you all taking time and becoming the market expert. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It was all helpful.
Bye-bye.